WhatsApp is putting an age limit on users. Instagram is about to let users download their content, and Facebook's now sending notifications about new privacy policies. All of this in the European Union. Wondering why? It's all part of the European Union Data Protection Regulation, the biggest intervention in online privacy ever. Its main purpose is to give users control over their data, letting them know what information is being stored and where and how it's being used. Users also have the right to be forgotten, which allows you to potentially have your data deleted. Meaning, if your high school photos are not of public interest, a controller, let's say Google, will have to erase them at your request. But not only that, the law forbids consent statements that are confusing. They now have to be clear and as easy to cancel as they are to accept. If a misuse of your data could put your rights and freedoms at risk, a data processor has to notify you within 72 hours without undue delay. In other words, if a company like Cambridge Analytica misuses your data and a company like Facebook is aware of it, you must be informed about it within 3 days. So you won't have to wait for a whistleblower and an international scandal to find out. The law also includes something called a subject access request, which means you can send an email to your boss asking for all the emails that refer to you, performance reviews, computer access logs, lists of phone calls to, from, or about you, even the CCTV footage, and all the other private data about you. And your employer needs to send it within 30 days. But what happens if a company breaks the law? Well, it would have to pay a fine of up to $24 million, or 4% of their annual income. Whichever is greater is paid. The data protection law was passed in April 2016 and is due to be enforced by the 25th of May 2018. But the assistant to the European Data Protection Supervisor says the EU doesn't want to do witch hunting.
On the other hand, you have to remember that when the complaints come to the Data Protection Office, the Data Protection Authority has to approach it with the whole toolbox that is given by the General Data Protection Regulation.
The biggest change the new law brings is that it would affect all companies from around the world dealing with data of users in the EU. But if you don't live in this part of the world, there's bad news. You don't get all this protection. Companies around the world aren't willing to offer the same rights, nor are other countries asking them to.
We are more and more surveilled, both by the state and by the other entities that exist on the market. We don't want to live neither in the world of the 1984 by Orwell, but also not the Brave New World by Huxley, where everybody is surveilling everybody.
Joining me from Brussels now is Joe McNamee. He's the Executive Director at European Digital Rights. That's a civil rights organisation specialising in the digital environment. Joe, great to have you on the show. How has the rollout of GDPR gone? I mean, we've had reports of some new US news websites like the LA Times being inaccessible in the EU today.
Yes, it has been reported that one or two sites have seem to believe that their data processing practices are so unreasonable that they can't be sure that they're in line with European law. I think if that kind of practice is going on, I think it's good that that's becoming more transparent.
Do you think this is something of a Y2K moment for Europe, a little blip that's going to pass by mostly unnoticed by most users?
I think it's yes and no. I think there's an aspect from the perspective of individuals, but there's also an aspect from the perspective of companies. And I think what GDPR is going to do, because it has much more enforcement and much higher penalties than before, it's going to bring privacy thinking into the planning and into the thinking of companies, so that there will be fewer bad practices and more what is referred to in the directive and the regulation as data protection by design and data protection by default. So this won't be visible to users on one level. They won't see that changes, but it will bring better practice into the culture of how businesses deal with data. From the end user's perspective, they have more powers to demand access to data, to rectification of data, to deletion of data, because the penalties are higher and because the data protection authorities of individual states are both, should be both better funded and also cooperating more efficiently with each other. So it's a real, it's a move of, it's a paradigm shift, if you will. It's a change from an old regime of weak rules and weak enforcement and weak thinking about privacy and data protection to a culture of enforcement.
Right. Joe, we're running out of time, but very quickly, do you think if GDPR had been in place before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, that wouldn't have happened?
It's difficult to tell. I think that the penalties would have been so high that I think that it would have been there would have been a major disincentive to Facebook to build its systems in this way.
Okay. Joe McNamee, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Joe McNamee there, the Executive Director at European Digital Rights. Thank you.